Well, this is a fine kettle of fish, isn't it? Hello everyone, and welcome to Shortcomings with Designs of Early Aircraft Carriers. Now, I am recording this on the 26th. I'm recording this when I am still sans Iron Brew. The world is wrong. The world is dark. The world is very, very bad. Tomorrow, though, my car goes to be serviced and checked. This is the new to me second-hand car I've got, and the place next to it is a reliable store of Iron Brew, so I intend to walk in there and walk out with many bottles that will see me through my research trips, bottles that will see me through my many recordings which I've got to come to cover for me on the research trips. So hopefully I'll be much happier tomorrow when this is live. Now, shortcomings with designs of early aircraft carriers. Before I get into this, I'm going to give you the reason why I mentioned about the lack of Iron Brew and the discussion at the beginning. I'm drinking Coke. This is because the bottles of water I ordered didn't come. The bottles of Coke, which I originally ordered to help clean the bathrooms, trust me, it works, did come. Now, Coke is a fine substitute most of the time, but I have noticed it does lead to me being even more sarcastic than my particular pernicious British nature tends to inspire me to be. So, and checking the sound is recording, let's begin. Shortcomings. By definition, a fault or failure to reach a particular standard. Early aircraft carriers had no standard, because they were the first of a new type of ship. There could be no standard we can measure them against. Apart from we can measure them against each other, but that is kind of difficult. But they do have standards of common sense and logic. Okay? Common sense and logic. So that's what I'm going to be applying. Plus, the more you build, the more standards become obvious. And for early carriers, I've taken this to mean ships configured as full aircraft carriers in commission during or prior to 1940. After 1940, I've decided they might be new modern carriers, but they're not early carriers anymore. Now, please note at many points I have added in provisos to note that I am drinking Coke. Now, I have also, because I have done other videos on them, refrained from including the Kriegsmarine and Ranger Marina carrier designs. Mainly because I don't want to repeat myself. But, in a note, I'm going to put only here. Tomorrow, my car is going to be serviced. So, if you watched the live or haven't yet seen the live, you'll be able to tell how big the bill was by how much my particular gene pool is reacting, by how rude I get when I get to the burn. Because it's going to be bad this evening on Coke. If the bill is truly excruciating, I'll be taking out all my frustrations on that particular French carrier. And I feel I can do this because the French had some absolutely excellent designs for aircraft carriers they were considering at various points. They have some really wonderful ideas. And yet they build the burn. France, I love you. I love your people. You're lovely. You're nice. I am never going to be considered a Francophile, but I am also not someone who hates the French. However, please let me say this with admiration in my heart. You have some of the world's best designers. You also have some of the world's craziest designers. I'm not sure what happened with the burn, but this happens with other projects, where somehow you manage to not even let the craziest designers come and play around and do design, because as crazy as they are, they tend to produce something which is still inspirational. This is just meh. Meh is the best description for it. And that's not a reflection on the crew, that's not a reflection on how hard they worked, on all the efforts they put into the wars and all the duties they did. No, it's not. It's a, what happened, France? Yes, you oscillate between terrible designs, meh designs, it's the best description for them, and great designs of ships, but usually when it comes to innovative concepts, you're at the forefront of producing at least something which is interesting and makes everyone else think. Here are the boxes. Argus and Langley. I'm not sure why Argus hasn't italicized itself. I'll fix that before the live. What could possibly be wrong with them? They are the first carriers, really. I'm going to be getting into the first designed carriers. That's why Hosho isn't here. But these are the first carriers, really, for Britain and America that they would consider carriers. In that they have a full-length flight deck. Notice I haven't put Furious in her earliest configurations, because who in their right mind, which absolute imbecile, and I do know which imbecile, but that would be an entire, if I start discussing that particular person, that would be an entire video in and of itself, thought it was a sensible idea to go, you know what, we're launching and recovering aircraft. Aircraft depend upon airflow to fly. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a takeoff ramp and a landing ramp, fore and aft, and we're going to leave the superstructure in the middle of the ship. And that's going to create lots of dirty air and bivouacs, which is going to make landing an absolute nightmare. And then we're going to make ramps around it to take aircraft forward and max, and that's a brilliant idea. And you're just sitting there going, okay, you're really special, aren't you, as a human? You're incredibly special. You're so special that you should probably be on your own planet. But Argus and Langley, there is nothing really to critique about them. They're a bit small, but they're conversions and they're proofs of concept. The fact that Argus spends the time in service she does is, frankly, it says more about Britain than it does about her. And the fact that the US gets rid of Langley as early as it does and turns her back into a seaplane carrier also says something about them. Because she was still useful as a force multiplier, if nothing else. You could use her as the pilot training carrier and training up the pilots. And she doesn't really take up that much tonnage. This is one of the things. Usually I get, when I start talking about it, people go back and go, well, you know, they were... And I go, what? What were they doing? They were trying to save tonnage underneath the... because of the scenario, you know, because of the Washington treaties, and that's why they did it. And you sit there and go, that's really what you're going with. They had a vessel which, in terms of displacement, was 12,900 tons. And that is a vessel which they are so worried about in 1936 they turn it back into a seaplane carrier in 1936? There's not really a good reason to try and save 12,900 tons in 1936, but it would have been useful to have her around. And imagine if she'd been around a few years later. She could have been really useful. And that's what Argus was used for. Argus was a sort of escort carrier, training carrier, ferry carrier, and all those things, and was useful for that. Now, here are Hosho and Hermes. One of them was the first vessel to be designed as an aircraft carrier, one of them was the first vessel to be built the whole way up as an aircraft carrier. There are lots of lessons to learn from them. For starters, Hermes, just a little too heavy under standard displacement to actually fit underneath the Washington Treaty. But one does wonder whether she was what was used to set the baseline of the Washington Treaty. If the various powers wanted to make sure she was included in the accounting of the carriers. Because she was considered a pretty effective vessel when she was first entered service. The Royal Navy weren't building her as a fleet carrier. They weren't building her as something which was going to be a primary carrier. They thought those would have to be bigger and carry more aircraft. No, she was always built as, to an extent, a cruiser escort carrier. And it's one of those things that if the treaty limit had been set at 11,000 tons, i.e. any ship below that doesn't count towards your carrier tonnage, the British probably would have churned out vessels like Hermes. When I say churned, I mean built one every couple of years. Because they were useful. She was a force multiplier on the China station in the South Atlantic, in the Indian Ocean. In every station she was deployed to, she was a force multiplier. She made the cruisers more effective. And she was good at that. Hosho is a fine proof of concept. You can build an aircraft carrier. You've got a round down coming along. Now, that's actually something which makes sense prior to the introduction of catapults, when you're trying to get as much clean air in as possible in order to help your aircraft with lift. The whole point is you not only are making it easy for the air to fly over the deck, you're also trying to get the ship up as fast as possible. This affects their designs and their roles, and is understood. Hosho, well, she could manage 25 knots. And Hermes could manage 25 knots. So they're fast-ish. $11,000 tons in standard for Hermes. Hosho did get underneath the treaty limits. 7,590 tons in standard, only 9,646 tons in normal. 2 Parsons geared turbine sets supply her power. She is an interesting and capable vessel. But the thing is, she's also much smaller than any of the other vessels contiguous at the time. Akagi, Furious, Courageous, Glorious, Saratoga, Lexington. She looks a lot smaller. But again, what is her role? Her role is to train a nascent air force, a naval air force, to train it, to make it work. And that's what she did. Now, here is where we start to get into issues, because we have Hermes and we have Argus. So, they're all Navy building. And Furious and Eagle, okay. Right. Eagle is a conversion of a battleship. She's an interesting ship because she's surprisingly robust. One of the things that's interesting about her is they immediately just sort of decide that she's going to spend most of her time protecting the battle line and working out with the battle fleet, and that makes sense. She's going to be operating observer aircraft, supporting them. She's good for that. She is, after all, a converted battleship. But for some reason they decide to go for a T-shaped lift. Why? Why go with a T-shaped lift? What is the entire reasoning for it? Well, I'll tell you, because the idea was that whilst larger aircraft would have to have their wings folded to go up and down, fighters could go up and down with their wings already spread to launch more quickly. Okay, you're going, that's a sensible idea. However, here's a small consideration for you. If I'm building a lift that's going to be a T-shaped, that means I've got effectively dead space on my deck, both down in the lift and above, that I can't really use for anything because the lift is going up and down, and I can't use that space because it has to be free for plane wings to go across. So why don't I just build a lift which is rectangular shaped or square shaped, which is big enough for a fighter to go on with her wings spread, and maybe if I put a little work in it, it's going to be big enough for maybe a couple of folded wing aircraft to go on there at the same time, which could be really helpful if I wanted to speed up the evolution of my strikes. Or alternatively, and this is just me thinking this, it's great future-proofing, considering at this point I already realise aircraft are growing in size and getting bigger. Yeah, I can already see that, because if I look at the aircraft that were around at, let's say, 1915, and I look at the aircraft that are around in 1920, there's a difference in them. There is. An Eagle's commissioned in 1924. She's commissioned in 1924. So that means war's been over for 6 years. Let's say 5 to make it include the whole incidents in Russia going on. And whilst David Beatty is still hanging around as First Sea Lord, why is there no thought going into this? Now, I do know who the Third Sea Lord was in this period, and I look forward to writing that particular book in my series on Third Sea Lords and Directors in Naval Construction. I really do look forward to writing that book. But I also think there were a lot of options there. And please note, I'm not really skipping on Furious, but the big problem with her is that takeoff position between the flight of the guns on the lower position, and I'm going to be having so much fun talking about that problem on other ships, I think I can skip to the burn. Now, here is the burn, and if I expand this screen, you will see that I have been busily doing some artwork. Yes, I have been drawing away. I have been, well, actually no, I've been playing around in GIMP and doing some stuff with pictures and the design overlay I found, which was a very good one for the class of battleship she belonged to. And both the class of battleship and the aircraft carrier that comes from it are disturbingly interesting in a sort of fatalistic way. Burn, how do I put this politely? Burn had a top speed of 21.5 knots. Burn had 4 shafts, with the 2 central shafts being powered by a steam turbine set supplied by Parsons, and the 2 external shafts being powered by 2 triple expansion steam engines. They did consider going with 2 turbine sets, but they decided no, they wanted the triple expansion engines for longer range steaming. She had 12 Norman boilers. She displaced 22,500 tons in standard. Had a length of 182.5 meters overall, a beam of 35.2 meters at the flight deck level, and a draft of 8.86 meters. She was commissioned first as a carrier in 1927, December the 5th, 1927. She'd originally been laid down to become a battleship on the 10th of January 1914. So that's more than 13 years of construction. That's very, very close to 14 years to construct her. And I do realise there was the pause and then the reconversion and all the rest going on, but seriously. And with those wonderful triple expansion engines, she could do 6,500 nautical miles at 10 knots. A speed notable for several things, one of them being not being able to really assist with taking off aircraft. She did have a belt of 83mm thick armour, and she had 24mm of armour on her flight deck, which means she doesn't qualify as the first armoured carrier. She doesn't. Why not, I hear outrage as I say this? Well, that's because the illustrious class had 4.5 inches on the waterline belt, 3 inches on the flight deck, 4.5 inches on the bulkheads, 4.5 inches on the hangar sides, and between 3 and 4.5 inches, depending on which side you're talking about, on the magazines. That's armouring your carrier and producing an armoured box carrier. All Byrne has is the leftover residue of stuff they couldn't get off her because it's so ingrained into her design as a battleship. But what does she have which is good? She has 3 elevators. Woohoo! And they are good ones. And I mean good ones. I like the elevators on her. The forward elevator could lift 2,000 kilograms and was 8 meters by 12 meters. It was intended only to handle fighters. No T-cut though. For some reason, they decided to have it as a 2-story configuration so that aircraft could be flown off it while it was in lower position. And you're probably thinking, well, that sounds sensible, you're having to take it off. But having 3 elevators is good. Having it positioned so you have to have basically an elevator with a roof is not so good. It puts a lot of weight forward, and there's an honest question, why do you have it so far forward if it's going to disrupt flying ops? And you know it's going to disrupt flying ops, and how do I know you know it's going to disrupt flying ops? Because you build it with a roof. You see, that's one of those clues, okay? If you have to do something which sounds stupid, then probably you're doing it because you've already made a stupid decision in the first place, and you really should have thought it through and just go, look, mea culpa, putting a lift here is obviously not the right decision to do. It's going to be very heavy, and there's going to be no point to it, and I'm going to look nuts every time I put my lift up. So how about I move it back, or I just go with 2 lifts? Having 3 lifts is nice, but I could probably do with 2 lifts. Now, the center elevator was intended for reconnaissance aircraft, with their wings deployed. So that was 10 meters by 15 meters in size. I like it! It could handle 5,000 kilograms, so 5 tons. However, it was slow and required 3 minutes to complete a cycle. So I have a slow supersized one and a fast one which looks weird. Okay. To enable flight operations to continue while it was at the hangar deck level, The open elevator shaft was provided with a heavy clamshell doors at the flight deck level. You can see those in this picture. I haven't even got onto the aircraft handling system. I am just talking about the elevators. The aft elevator was 15 meters by 15 meters and was designed for torpedo bombers. Also able to do 5 tons carried up and down, but it required 5 minutes to cycle and also had clamshell doors. Okay, here's an idea. Get rid of the clamshell doors. I like the size of the elevators. That's fine. They can be stored in the upright position. I know it's not a perfect scenario, but it's fine. And only drop down to needed aircraft and only have 2 of them. Okay? And use the weight you save from the clamshell doors, the forward elevator which just looks weird, to get both of them down to a cycle time of, I don't know, a minute and a half maximum. I prefer a minute, but I'll be prepared to take 93 seconds at maximum. 93, not a second more, not a second less. That's my maximum. Okay? You can do that, France. I know you can do that. You're one of the countries which... Not sure where they were when you were building this poor ship, but what you lumbered it with were not your brightest and not your best. I'm not even sure if they were yours. Or if they weren't just the, I don't know, the interns who were there and on a Saturday and no one was supervising them. She was designed with 2 hangar decks. Oh, this only gets worse. The upper deck, which was 124 meters long, was the only one which could be used for aircraft operations, as the lower hangar was dedicated to workshops and aircraft assembly and storage facilities. Not bad, not great, but basically it suggests that you're basically bringing a version of Unicorn with you. So you've got your own internal Unicorn. Okay. Now, the fact that the hangars were theoretically 19.5 meters wide, but because even though you did have the lower deck hangar with all the storage stuff, the equipment and ready-use weapon storage racks reduced that to 15 meters. Now, again, let's just ask something. How wide was that after elevator again? And the central elevator? They're both 15 meters wide. Okay. You see, I like them being 15 meters wide. I like having big elevators. It allows you to move aircraft with their wings folded up multiple times. But perhaps have slightly thinner elevators and, I don't know, maybe use the lower hangar as more of a storage space than an aircraft assembly space and maintenance space. And so you can move your aircraft around more and you can make things more organized, because as I can see, if this is going to be an issue. Okay, the upper hangar had a height of 6.5 meters. Apart from the forward section, which they decided was going to be for fighters only, so they reduced it to 5 meters. And they did that by adding in an extra deck that contained the berthing for the air group. So they used a 1.5 meter space to put in an extra deck for the berthing for the air group. You're converting a battleship. You have got rid of all the guns. You are not short of berthing spaces if you do it correctly. You're also not exactly got a small island structure going on here. What? There is... Why? The hangars were subdivided into 4 sections by asbestos fire curtains and equipped with 3 overhead rails with which to move aircraft and other heavy equipment. So, and then let's start on accessing the lower hangar, shall we? Okay. So that means you're moving the aircraft around. You've got barely any space to move those aircraft around, but you're going to be moving them around on rails. Because, yeah, that's really what you want to be doing when you're in the middle of the sea with a ship which is going from like this. What I want is my big heavy aircraft to be moved around on rails. And you're probably sitting thinking, rails? What do you mean, like on the floor? No, overhead rails. So they're dangling and they can, unless you're all holding, they can start swinging. Don't worry, it gets worse. The lower hangar is equipped with 3 large hatches at the base of each of the elevator shafts. This allows for access to the upper hangar. The bottoms of the elevators were fitted with rails that matched the overhead rails in the hangars. Aircraft will be hung from these rails underneath the elevators, and the elevators will be raised or lowered as needed to move the aircraft up and down between the two. The reason I'm adding this in is because someone was going to respond to me, well, maybe it took 5 minutes for it to cycle between the 2 hangar decks. No. That would have been sensible. The reason it's taking 5 minutes and 3 minutes and all this time to cycle is because they've made the most complicated elevators that you can possibly imagine for no particular reason. Other than they can say they designed what they think is an engineeringly perfect system, which literally no one else is using. And by this point, when she enters service, remember, she enters service in 1927. In 1927, there are other carriers already in service. There is Langley. She's in service. There is Glorious and Courageous. Well, they're being converted. There is Furious in service. Argus in service. Hosho in service. Hermes in service. Eagles in service. Akagi is in service before the burn. Akagi. There are all these carriers. Not a single one has rails. They operated seaplane carriers in World War One. Why? Which bright spark came up with this idea and thought, let's make life more complicated and less viable? Why? What happened to that person? And I am just talking about the aviation facilities because if I start going into the engines, I am going to end up crying for this ship. Because she could have been so good. The French have such good engineering. And yet, I don't know who was put in charge. I do know who, but no, I don't know who approved this, and I don't know how many designs they went through, but they needed to go through a few more, and someone needed to be... That ship needed its advocate. They converted that ship before it was legally of age. It needed an advocate in the room. It needed its own court-appointed lawyer to sit there and go, what are you doing to me? This is not fair. You might be the Marine Nationale, you might be the various construction teams, you might be my de facto parents, but you are not being fair to me. She needed an advocate. If I could have the access to TARDIS, and I was allowed to do one thing, I would go back in time and be the Burns advocate. Because she needed someone in that room looking out for her. She did. It's terrible what they did to her. Glorious and courageous. Okay, please note, thank God, and I don't know how this happened, but thank God, after the experience of Argus, and then Furious, someone, and I must presume whoever it was an amazingly insightful person who I have great respect for, pointed out to the Royal Navy that carriers without islands were absolute nightmares to control and difficult to land on, because the island provided some sort of height gauge and various things for the pilot coming in, something visual they could look at, and it was actually useful. However, Furious, Courageous, and Glorious all have the same joyous idea. Let's have a second flying off deck. Okay. This means we can make do with only a couple of lifts. Okay. It'll be able to take fighters. Okay. And they'll be able to fly off from there and everyone will be happy. Okay. Small problem. Just an ever so small problem. Tiny problem. The air on those takeoff ramps was frickin' terrible. Combined with the effect of the flight deck with the round down above them, it created what can only be described as a suction vortex, which would make taking off interesting. And as fighters got bigger and heavier, and actually needed more runway to get off, it stopped being a liability and a proof of manliness to actually take your aircraft off from there, and became, frankly, verging on suicidal. Now, the idea had some logic, because they'd used ramps like this from normal warships which are being converted to take off aircraft. You know, we stick a ramp over the guns, they fly off, and those daring Japs in their flying machines go flying away. But this is an actual proper carrier. And the thing is, you'd had Eagle, which didn't have one, and worked fine. You'd had Hermes, which didn't have one, and worked fine. You'd had Argus, which didn't have it, and had worked fine. You'd had Furious, it had been funny. At this point, just imagine how much more capable these ships would have been if that had been forward hangar space, and they'd built up the hangar and the flight deck to the end of the hull as far as they could. It would have taken more tonnage, they had plenty to spare. They were not Lexington and Saratoga. They could have taken more aircraft in their hangar. And they could have provided more capability overall. Lexington and Saratoga. What happens when you convert a battle cruiser design which frankly would have had trouble taking on most cruisers in terms of if they'd actually hit it they'd have done severe damage to it, into a very nice carrier design, which is often causes some people to overestimate the battle cruiser design. I think they look at the capabilities of them as an aircraft carrier and think, oh, therefore they must have been good as a battle cruiser design. No, the Americans could do better. The Americans could do a lot better. Again, I'm sorry, but US Navy, I expect you to do well, because you're quite good at designing. So when you do less than well, I'm going to call you out on it. There are other navies who I will be charitable to, because they have never produced good designs. When I am going through the Soviet cruisers, I am going to be charitable to them. Because that's all they have, is charity. But US Navy, you actually produce decent ships. I will critique you, like you produce decent ships. Lexington and Saratoga, very good. However, small thing, just a small one. I realise designed in a period where they were considered to going to be operating forward, with cruisers in a scouting role. But why, in the name of all things fluffy duck and quackers, 8-inch guns? Why? Okay, you've got the weight of them when you're worried about tonnage. You've got the fact that if you use them and they're firing across your flight deck, you're not going to have anything left on that area on your flight deck. Especially when they're next to your lifts, which you can see quite clearly here. It's pretty darn close to a lift. They take up flight deck space. A large chunk of it. Their ammunition takes up space. All their crew take up space. Everything takes up space and tonnage. And, okay, I hear you turn around and go, but Alex, you're always saying aircraft were not the powerful weapons that they became in World War II, and especially in the latter half of World War II, in the 1920s and 30s when these ships were built. So it's sensible to have an 8-inch guns. But under what circumstances do you actually want your carrier engaging in a cruiser fight? And I realise this coming from a nation which has produced a carrier which decided it was going to get involved in the cruiser fight when it was sandwiched alongside 3 battleships, because why not? And a nation which produced a forward aviation support ship which decided that, frankly, it was going to get close enough to bombard Korea because people started firing at it. I understand this all, and I realise this doesn't give me many legs to stand on, but in our defence, we did call one of them an armoured carrier, and the other one armoured carrier design, and the other one we called HMS Unicorn. And Unicorn just thinks it's always got to be the pointy end of the spear, because it's supposed to have the point. But these are your big major fleet carriers. They are pretty darn critical at any point. And when you're thinking about when they're first building, they're going to be the reconnaissance assets, they're going to be the fighter defense, they're going to be the strike aircraft. The Americans are already thinking in terms of the big alpha strike units. That's what they've been testing on Lexington and on Langley and developing that up. So that's what they're thinking of. So why then use all the tonnage, all that space? I mean, they wouldn't have probably had to lie as much as they did about these ships if they just deleted the 8-inch guns. They could have fitted them with more 5-inch guns and they'd have been fine. Look, imagine that, 4 twin 5-inch guns. They'd have been fine. So, now, also, please note, no secondary flying off position. Thank you, America. Smart. Sane. Britain, what happened to you? Japan! Really? Okay. So, how do I put this in a frame of reference? Somebody had a bright idea. It happens. I am not quite sure why, but some people had a bright idea. The Japanese and the British had both been working together a lot on aircraft development. There had been various missions going backwards and forwards. There is no evidence that the Japanese copied the British design effort, but there is a fact that there is a similarity of thought in terms of starting point, so I presume they just went one step further. Basically, they are trying to improve the launch and recovery cycle by allowing for simultaneous launch and recovery of aircraft. This is an early attempt, that's what these XR, at sort of an angled flight deck, where you could take off from the lower positions, especially if you were a fighter or a smaller aircraft, and land on the upper deck. It's the same idea between Courageous and Glorious. It's just the taking off part gets very, very difficult, and everyone could have kind of seen that coming with the way aircraft were growing in size, especially as you didn't yet have what British would term accelerators and Americans would later term catapults, and nowadays are called catapults. The reason the British didn't call them catapults was because catapults were things they fitted to escorts, to cruisers and capital ships to launch aircraft, and accelerators were what fitted to carriers. To differentiate between the two types of thing, they were called different names. And especially as they were kind of different systems. The main flight deck is for a Kagi is 190.2 meters long, 30 meters wide. The middle flight deck was 15 meters long, and lower flight deck was 55 meters long. Basically, even if you were going to try and take off a fighter, it's carrying gun ammunition only from the middle flight deck at 15 meters. What I can say is that it's also made more complicated by the fact that some bright spark decided to add on the middle flight deck, on a Kagi, guns! Yeah! Guns! Some absolute... I'm not quite sure how to describe this without sounding absolutely terrible, but someone decided I'm going to copy the Americans and stick 2 twin 8-inch guns on this shit. So not only is this flight deck going to be short, it's going to have guns on either side to make my taking off even more difficult and make even more difficult air. Thankfully, they eventually reconstruct her into a single deck flight platform, an island structure. Because again, notice no island? And please notice the exhaust. Notice the exhaust. Now, they can cause so much fun, those exhausts. They can heat up your hangar to incineratingly hot. They can cause issues. And by the way, I didn't get into this with Furious. I really should have done. But Furious has possibly the worst design of exhaust ever fitted to any carrier. I mean, literally, they're designed to not only cook the hangar, they take up a horrendous amount of hangar space going through them, so that the hangar is actually not as practical as it might seem from its supposed size. But these are also excelente. Ryujin Ranger. So, someone, I can't think who, decided that they were going to try and make light carriers. Ranger displaces 14,810 tons. Isn't that cool? Ryujo displaced 8,000 tons as built, 10,600 tons as her normal operating, because they found out they built her too light and she was capsizing. So, here is the thing. Ranger is supposed to carry 76 to 86 aircraft. And displace, as said, 14,810 tons. Let's consider good old Hermes here. Hermes is a lovely ship. Hermes displaces roughly 11,000 tons. So she is 3,800 tons lighter in standard. She carries 20 aircraft and can do 25 knots. Ranger carries a maximum of 86, said normally 76, has 3 elevators, 3 catapults, and can do 29.3 knots, 10,000 nautical miles at 15 knots, and has a crew of, well, roughly 2,461. Now, there are two things which you're thinking. Wow, the Americans get a lot for their extra 3,000 tons. They do. 3,800 tons. They really work that. Secondly, you're thinking, how do they get that much from it? Well, I can tell you. That ship is so lightly built, I'm surprised it could frickin' hold itself up in a wave. I mean, seriously. That ship is a feat of engineering. I mean, they list things like it has 2 inches of armor on the belt and 2 inches of bulkhead armor and a 1 inch on the over the steering gear in terms of armor. And I'm honestly going, what are we talking about? Are we talking about sort of patches, which are sort of cubes? Or are we actually talking a solid belt? Because if we talk a solid belt, then that's just going to make even the internal even more interesting. And then you've got that line of portholes, which kind of tells you exactly where the armor is if you look. Because I'm guessing the belt is directly over the engineering spaces, because look at where the portholes disappear. And they go down 3 levels. That ain't normal. Okay? That is not normal. Even Ryuju, they do not go down as low as they go down on Ranger. So, basically, what she is the lightest possible hull you could possibly imagine, with scaffolding on raised poles above her supporting a flight deck. Okay? That's Ranger. And I'm sorry, but again, US Navy, I expect better from you. You have good naval architects. It's just... She was kept in the Atlantic Fleet for the entirety of World War II. And there is a reason for that. Ryujo, well, she was also kept to strictly second line roles initially, until the Japanese really started to lose aircraft. She did take part in mid-February 1942 attacking ships evacuating from Singapore and those sort of things in areas where there weren't enemy aircraft carriers or capital ships. By the way, for another feat of engineering, she could carry 48 aircraft, apparently. Also do 29 knots and 10,000 nautical miles at 14 knots. Yeah. But no, she is... They're just so lightly built, it's beyond belief. To try and accommodate the amount of aircraft, the lifts and all the other stuff, they are just massively lightly built. Now we have Ark Royal. Okay, Ark Royal. I like her. So, of course, you expect me at this point to go, I'm going to be nice about her. But, no. No, I'm not. The reason I'm not, and I say this with a lot of love for her, is because, again, I expect better from the British, and also because I had the honour of doing a PhD in development of naval aviation. That was what my PhD topic was. 100,000 words, and someday you'll all be able to read it online, because it should at some point actually be made free for people to read. I did tick the box. It's called What Value the Dark Blue Skies. And I go through Ark Royal, and I talk about her. One of the things I noticed early on is the British did have an idea for her. Now, under the London Treaty, the definitions for an aircraft carrier had changed slightly. Under the Washington Treaty, there had been this idea that ships below 10,000 tons wouldn't be counted, under the treaty tonnage of 135,000 tons, with 27,000 tons standard being the limiting displacement of an aircraft carrier. Under the London Treaty, they change it to remove no aircraft carrier of 10,000 tons or less standard displacement shall be acquired by or constructed by any for any contracting parties. And there are limits on aircraft carriers' armament. Aircraft carrier must not be designed or constructed for carrying a more powerful armament than that authorized by Article 9 or Article 10 of the Washington Treaty. As the case may be, wherever in said Articles 9 and 10 the caliber of 6 inches 152 millimeters is mentioned, the caliber of 6.1 inches 155 millimeters is substituted therefore. Okay, so 6-inch guns allowed. Now, Ark Royal is 22,000 tons in standard. Now, for this, the British get a 30-knot ship with 3 shafts, 3 geared steam turbines. It has 2 catapults. It has all sorts of wonderful things, including a 4.5-inch belt and a 3.5 inches of deck armour over the boiler rooms and magazines. For 22,000 tons. So you theoretically had 5,000 more tons to play with if you built up to the full 27,000 tons. Now you probably wouldn't have had to use that, but another 1,000 to 2,000 more tons would have got the RN, the design which could have done 32 knots, which could have done, well, had a little bit more armour, especially over the flight deck, so it would have actually been an armoured carrier, and more importantly, would have had the enhanced anti-submarine, anti-torpedo defences. Now, why does this matter? Well, in my PhD I don't go into this so much because there's not much point in discussing the things in hindsight. I'm looking at decisions they made and why they made them. But the reason that design hasn't gone through is because, of course, they want to maximise the tonnage. Great. However, the RN had already worked out in exercises that carriers and capital ships were the #1 targets for submarines. That had come through in exercises. Carriers were also very useful for attacking submarines and providing the fleet with defense from submarines organically, thanks to these sort of aircraft: torpedo, spotter, reconnaissance in this swordfish form, but torpedo but mainly spotter and reconnaissance aircraft of the Fairey 3F form in the earlier 1920s that would provide anti-submarine warfare support. So, you know what the carrier is going to be used for. You know that something which can do 30 knots is going to be pretty darn critical, especially to your Far East deployments. Basically, Ark Royal is being built as your strike carrier for your long-range operations, and you know you're not going to get another 2 or 3 equivalent to her until you get Courageous and Glorious and Furious off your books. So why not build the bigger ship? And why not build it with the better defences? Because you know how important it's going to be. The reason? Honestly, it's kind of like with the 14-inch guns on the King George V's. Because far too many people were hoping, especially in 1930, that Britain could set an example and could lead it to peace. Interesting enough, Ark Royal herself is the first aircraft carrier ordered by Admiral Henderson when he becomes 3rd Sea Lord. She's part of the 1934 build program. She's given to Camel Lairds, which are described as the best strike carrier, the most experienced in terms of strike carrier design of any of the yards. An interesting turn of phrase, considering at this point they hadn't officially built a single aircraft carrier. So how did they get that? And laid down in September 1935, launched April 1937, commissioned December 1938. She was a good and capable ship. They also did consider deck-edge lifts because the director of naval construction, Sir Arthur Johns, was obsessed, thanks not a far part to the 3rd Sea Lord who came in 1933, with maximising the number of aircraft that could be carried and the operation efficiency of the carrier. They just decided that actually if they went to try and develop deck-edge lifts, that would take longer. That would add length of time. It's kind of like the scenario that's going on with the boilers and the turbines for the British. Yorktown and Enterprise. I love them. They're beautiful carriers. But again, this is the point. Yorktown. The Yorktown class. They are designed around carrying the maximum number of aircraft possible. They are 90 aircraft, but this time they displace 25,900 tons fully loaded. That, makes life a little bit easier. And 20,100 tons in standard, which makes life a lot easier when it comes to operating yourself as a carrier. It's amazing what an extra 6 or so thousand tons can do to your operating capabilities. It just makes things so much easier. Look at her. She actually looks like a solid ship. She doesn't look like she's made up of scaffolding. But, and I say this with a lot of love, and these ships are constructed next to each other at Newport News. It's one of my favourite pictures of all times is the 2 ships sitting next to each other being constructed. You can find that picture by searching for it in Google or just going to the Yorktown class aircraft carrier website. You will see this beautiful picture of these 2 hulls surrounded by humongous amounts of scaffolding. And you'll just think, how in the name of all things holy are they planning on putting 2 fully built carriers next to each other? They're laid down in 1934, so they're ordered sort of the same time as Ark Royal. They're launched in 1936. They're commissioned in 37 and 38. They actually laid down, launched and commissioned before Ark Royal is. So they are big impact ships. And they represent everything the US Navy's been thinking about. And they're great improvements. But one of the interesting things that you look at them and you sort of start thinking about when you're talking about them, and they're this is just a tad niggle, really. Just a tad niggle. But again, the US Navy's using 20,000 tons in standard, 20,100 tons. And yes, we will go, oh, well, there was the treaties and the limitations. And I agree. There are treaties and limitations. But by this point, the US Navy knows what it's going to use its carriers for. It has already started to develop the strike carrier concept and the big wing operations and the capabilities. It doesn't know how important they're going to be used in that role, but it has an idea for them. These ships, their command and control facilities, their flag deck facilities, all those, and their storage facilities for people and personnel, needs so much work. Thankfully, I will say this, is that the US Naval Attaché in Britain, J.C. Hunsaker, was the critical one who reported that Furious was absolutely terrible with boiler smoke. True. And that's why Buer decided to not build them as flush deck carriers. And we can all be happy with that one. But still, it's going to sound strange, but these ships are so close to what the US Navy ends up building and what the US Navy becomes, but they are not quite there. And they are ships which accomplish so much in many ways despite some of the limitations of their design. And limitations of their design are not things you think about. You think, oh, you're going to talk about aircraft operation. No, for aircraft operation and those things, they are very well designed for their style of what the Americans want them to do. I wouldn't want to take them into the Mediterranean, but they're very good for what the Americans want them to do in the Pacific. But for the command staff and their operations in that sort of scenario, they need more space. And we're not talking that adding on hundreds of tons. We're talking minimal. A few tons of steel to sort of give them a bit more space. Because staff don't need lots of heavy equipment. And not at this point. Radars, etc. and most of the radios and stuff that expands gets fitted later in the war. Again, having space for that and future-proofing is always a good thing. Just look at this next one. Hiryu! Hiryu, how are you? Hiryu. She's technically a modified Soryu design. And yes, I put her in here rather than Soryu because, well, how do I put it politely? Again, the Japanese have a bright idea. What is this bright idea? Well, have you noticed something about this ship and its positioning of its island? Let me be quite precise. I didn't critique this on the Ikagi and Kaga, because when they were built, they weren't built with islands. But then someone had a bright idea, and they decided to build two ship carriers with islands on the port side Akagi is one, and Hiryu is the other. And the fact that only 2 carriers in the entire history of humanity have been built with with their island structures on the port side tells you everything you need to know about this brilliant innovation. The idea was that your 2 carriers could steam along next to each other and provide defense for each other while conducting flight operations, because their islands were beyond opposite sides. It's a brilliant idea in theory. It's a great idea. It's a wonderful idea. Apart from, it causes everything to break down. These ships had more aircraft crashes than pretty much anything else by metric. The reason is quite simple. Pilots tend to be taught to fly with this hand on the stick and this hand on the power. Okay? So, when you see a problem and you sort of see something, you tend to do that. Now, if your island structure is on your right and you pull away, you're going off, say it's on the starboard, so it's to your right, you pull away, you pull out of it, and you don't hit it. If your structure is on your port, though, and you pull away, bang! Furthermore, the boiler uptakes were trunked to the ship's starboard side, amidships, and exhausted below flight deck level through 2 funnels that curved downward. Again. So, the boilers are going out on the starboard side, and the island is on the port side. So you have all the structuring, because you've used the same design pretty much from the Soryu, to take the funnels out to that side, but you've no longer got the island that side, so you now have twice as much interference in your flight deck and your hangar space. This is sounding really not smart, isn't it? And again, Japan, I expect better from you. Wasp. She's another Yorktown. But I would... and this is sort of a special thing to realise. She's a shrunk Yorktown. She is a baby Yorktown. She is basically the US Navy going, can we squeeze everything from a Yorktown into 25% less space? So they used low power propulsion machinery. So 25,000 shaft horsepower compared to 120,000 shaft horsepower of Yorktowns, and 150,000 shaft horsepower of the Essexes, and 100,000 shaft horsepower of the Independence class. No armour, pretty much. Her speed drops to 29.5 knots, which I'm not sure I consider modest speed, but it's not the fastest it's been. It's, it's a bit of a drop from the Yorktowns, but some people make a big fuss of it and go, oh, that's terrible, she's so slow. And you sit there and go, the Yorktowns were 32.5 knots. I don't think we're going to cry too much over a 3-knot difference in speed. They had pretty much the same cruising range, but she had no protection from torpedoes, and no side protection on boilers and internal aviation fuel stores. She was designed under the excuse of using treaty tonnage to get another fleet carrier. And you get something which is 14,900 tons standard. So displaces 100 tons more. 100 tons more than Ranger. And I have to admit, is a whole quantum class different than Ranger. If I had to pick which one to be in, I'd pick Wasp over Ranger. but I prefer not to be an Eva. Stick me in an armoured hangar carrier, please. I'll take a Midway. Or Indefatigable. Any of those later war armoured hangar carriers, pretty good. She's a lovely ship. But again, it's trying to build a fleet carrier on a light fleet carrier budget. And all the stores and all the facilities for those aircraft in that tonnage limitation. And it's just not good. It's just not good. Illustrious. Very small hangars in terms of their ceiling height. And again, seriously, once again, it's a case of we're going to see how, and I do promise this, how light we can build a carrier. They are actually heavier than Ark Royal. 23,369 tons. So they displace more. There is one thing that some people sometimes turn around and go, well, no, they displace the same weight as Ark Royal and, you know, they use all that. No. They displace nearly 1,400 tons more than Ark Royal. 1,400 tons, nearly more. And they carry half the aircraft. That shows you how much the armour weighs. But again, imagine if the British had used the full limit of the tonnage, or had lied shamelessly about the armour or some thickness. It just said, oh, it's normal steel, not armour steel, something like that. They couldn't have probably lied. It would have actually been difficult, especially as they were buying the armoured steel off Czechoslovakia and all sorts of places to try and make sure it didn't go to Germany. You know, forerunner of what would be done during the Falklands War. The British were buying everything so the Germans couldn't get it. Top speed 30 knots, free shaft, free geared steam turbines again. I've been over their armour. 4.5 inches waterline belt, 3 inches on the flight deck. Hangar sides and ends, 4.5 inches. They are a really, really cool class of ship. And yet, the height of the hangar in the Illustrious class, the upper hangar on Indomitable and is 4.3 meters. 4.9 meters in her lower hangar. Indomitable is, of course, the modified Illustrious class. And then, of course, the next class is sort of the Implacable class, which come off them, and they are equally as, oh Lord, what happened to you? Why? Why would anyone do this to you? We had decent sized hangars. Why? It's wrong. And they knew it was wrong. This is what I find at the time. You find this is a compromise that pretty much everyone at every level is forced to accept because of the insistence of various persons over the objections of the DNC and the Third Sea Lord, who actually managed to wring it out a bit more than they were supposed to. In that sort of, this is to try and get it as close to 23,000 tons as possible. As close to 23,000 tons as possible. And that was their designed tonnage weight. I gave the weight of Illustrious as it actually was, not her design tonnage weight. designed to be 23,000 tons. So designed to be theoretically 1,000 tons heavier than Ark Royal. And again, what could you have done with 1,000 tons more? Well, US Navy carriers were roughly 100 feet longer. 1,000 tons is not going to buy you an extra 100 foot. It's not. But we can sit there and think of what would have happened if these ships had been built with to be a tonnage of 25,000 tons, let alone the 27,000 tons the treaties lightened them. And what exactly they could have been built as. Now, why do I bring this up? Because the Implacable class, and I do love the Implacables. Implacable and Indefatigable are always pretty to me. They are fairly capable ships. And they are succeeded by the Audacious class, which are built in wartime under wartime conditions. Now, they are far, far bigger when completed than when planned. But for a couple of thousand extra tons, you could have got a ship with larger hangars. I'm not talking massively higher hangars, but it would be nice to have them at least being 6 meters. Would have made a massive difference, a 6 meter high hangar. And again, if we go back to the lovely vessel that's come before them, Ark Royal, well, her hangars were larger. Her hangars were much, much better. Not as much in height. They're still, well, yeah. They are still roughly 4.9 meters in height, which makes them not exactly easier, but they're wider and larger. Because that's what she's used her tonnage for. She's used her tonnage for her hangar space. There has to have been some sort of combination halfway between, or again, design a bigger ship. One of the things that comes through in when you're looking at the design studies, etc., is the DNCs and the Third Sea Lords keep saying, if you give us an extra 1,000 tons, we can do this. If you give us an extra 1,000 tons, we can do this. And there are various ways they look around into sort of getting around it, i.e. the water for armor scenario, etc. And they just don't manage to get it through. They still produce a very good design carrier. Let's be honest, it's a very good design carrier, well-designed carrier within the constraints implied. But there is part of me which sits there and goes, you knew better. So, did we actually learn anything? Well, let's see. CVA-01 was going to have aircraft passing around the outside of the island. Oh, Lord Lubberduck. Someone had looked at Furious and thought that was actually a good idea. It's a lovely idea in theory. It's a lovely idea in theory. In practice, just move the island slightly more to the side and give yourself the extra wider space. Or making a passageway along there. It's lovely, but that means your island structure is actually closer towards your flight deck, etc. Your takeoff, your landing position and angle deck, and it's just... You ideally want to give yourself space between those things as much as possible. Well, we've got deck edge lifts now, so the British probably learned that one. And because, again, if you think about it, if they'd gone with deck edge lifts for Ark Royal, that would have given them a lot more hangar space. And if you'd gone with deck edge lifts on the Illustrious class, you wouldn't have had the armor gapped because of the lifts, and yes, you did have the hangar spaces enclosed in machine spaces, etc., and workshops all around it to provide with extra protection. So you'd have had gaps in that because of the O8 for aircraft to get in and out. But you'd have also had a lot more hangar space. And you'd have had the space to store aircraft on the way in and out. For not much of a loss of protection, let's be honest. Especially if you kept them at the end still. Because who's gonna... The idea that someone's going to manage to lob a bomb through that hole in World War II, etc. If they did, it's a golden bullet. It's a golden BB lucky shot. Queen Elizabeth class. I like them. Wish they had more guns on them. We'll leave that to one side, though. Have we learned? Did we actually learn something from the early period of aircraft carriers? No, because we keep trying to reinvent the wheel. If we look at all these things, there is a perennial thing which keeps coming up, which is trying to get the most bang for your buck, whether it's cost or weight or both. This keeps coming up. You build carriers too small, too light, too few, because in the end, it's not the people who are making decisions about funding who suffer. It's not the people who get wrapped up in this cool idea which works so well on paper who suffer. God, CVA1. There are certain parts of that design you look at and it looks really, really cool. And then you look at it and go, why are there aircraft on this side of the island? Oh. Naval history is coming. Well, Battle of the Coronel is coming soon. Had the active class. I hope you enjoyed them. Questions answered until the brew comes out. Will be tomorrow when this comes out. Or Sunday, when I have 4 days time when I'm recording this, so it's kind of weird. Coming up on the Christmas topics, we have German heavy cruiser World War II, Soviet Navy 1918 to 1939, German heavy cruiser World War II, ooh, Commerce class. And I'm going to be nice about the Nida and the Cresta. I'm going to be trying to be kind about them. And of course, I'll be so kind about the Karas and the Slavas. It's in me to be kind, somewhere. I'll spend a few weeks hunting enough Iron Brew, so I'll be kind. Let's finish on a question. And I always like to add in a question, mainly because, well, I do like to add in the comments. And as you know, I like the comment response videos, which always goes on the video which has the most comments. So questions tend to respond to equal more comments. When the more people respond to a question, the more likelihood that those will be the questions I respond to, because those will be the most comments on a video. It's a simple system. So, looking back on the early aircraft carriers and World War II, what lessons do you think of World War II and the early carriers are we going to be relearning again soon? If you're looking at current carriers being designed around the world, the Hyundai carrier for Korea, the various Japanese projects going on, the eventual Russian whatever comes along, the Chinese development program, the Ford class. Well, Britain's got the Queen Elizabeth in service, so we're probably not going to be designing another carrier for at least another 20, 30 years if we get one then. I'll be campaigning for them, don't worry. But LHDs as well. We'll include we'll include all aviation-centric naval vessels that are primary aviation-centric naval vessels. So, that sort of scenario. What lessons of World War II carriers do you think have been forgotten? Which ones have been remembered? And which ones would you like to see remembered from the early carriers and World War II ones? Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you for all your support. Channel wouldn't be what it is without you, and it would certainly not be going anywhere like it is without you. So thank you very much. Have a nice day. Take care.